All right, well, we're back in the saddle.
Back in the saddle.
Back in the saddle, Steve Williams, Cornerstone Advisors, Al Dominic, also with Cornerstone. And forgive me for thinking about what's going on in the Southeast right now in SEC term. And for those listeners who are thinking about Gary Gensler and what he does for the Securities and Exchange Commission, I'm talking about Florida, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, all the big boys that, really make up our Saturdays.
Is there like 67 teams in the SEC now?
It seems like they're expanding. But, I thought about SEC football in the spirit of who we're going to be talking with today. We're dialing up this new episode of Plugged In with a really special CEO who's calling Columbus, Georgia, home at least as a headquarters. And so we have Mr. Kevin Blair, who's joining us remotely from Georgia. We've got to say hello to Kevin.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Kevin.
We're going to have a little bit of fun because as I was going through some of the prep, I noticed that Kevin and I spent a little time in the Commonwealth of Virginia, so we don't have that SEC alumni base. He's a JMU guy. I'm a W&L man. So we were right down 81 from each other. But I'm sure we appreciate some of the things that are going on, not just on a Saturday in the South, but really across, Monday through Sunday as customers do different things, businesses change, just the concept of banking continues to evolve.
Yeah, I've worked with and watched Synovus for 30 years. They're never not interesting, Kevin. This organization's always got something cool going on. So ready to dive in.
We're going to dive in and, at this point, listeners are probably well familiar with our propensity to pull music as a means to start a conversation. So we have 5 Georgian bands that I selected. Steve has no idea who's coming.
All right.
Kevin doesn't either. So just as a little cheat sheet, we've got the Allman Brothers, Charlie Daniels, REM, the Indigo Girls, and Ludacris.
Wow.
How's that for diversity?
Sounds like Georgia.
So we're not even going to start with Charlie Daniels' classic. This is the band's classic. That's going to come up. You're not going to know when that will be. But I thought we could get rocking and rolling with our Allman Brother friends who really kick things off by not wasting time no more. And so we ain't wasting time as we jump into this episode because the teams that are being built across the country have different compositions. And I was really struck by some of the advances that Synovus has made with its teams and how it's doing different things. In some ways, I think of that old Steve Ballmer chant on Microsoft stage where he was developer, developer, developer. I have to imagine that Kevin might walk into a boardroom saying it's talent, talent, talent. And I noticed that you spent a little time with Admiral McRaven recently for a leadership series that you did. And I thought we could kick things off by talking about leadership as you really think about it today.
Well, look, it's I think it is the most important element of every strategy. You can talk about sitting in the boardroom, talking about differentiating your go-to-market strategy or approach to segmentation. All of those things matter. But at the end of the day, the products and services we provide are fairly highly commoditized. And I believe that, especially in this digital world that we live in, that we believe at Synovus that you have to match the high-tech approach with a high-touch approach. And so for us, talent has been something that's very important to me. Number one, maintaining and growing the talent that we have at the bank. And we just finished our Voice of Team Member survey for this year, looking at our engagement levels. And we are at 91%, the highest level that we've ever had, puts us in the top 5% of all industries. And I think it speaks to the talent that we have at our company, but more importantly, their leaders that are creating an environment that is conducive to allowing people to do their best. And we all know that when you have a engaged workforce, you're getting discretionary effort, you're winning with your clients, because it's no secret that we also won this past year the J.D. Power #1 bank in the Southeast for service, and more importantly for trust. And it all correlates back to having a team member base that comes to work every day, purpose-driven, focusing on what's best for the client. And so I do think that's so important. And not only do we look at those engagement levels, we look at turnover levels. Our turnover this year is the lowest it's been in 15 years. And I think that's a function where people are voting with their feet. They're staying at the company. And I think that's another difference maker. When you think about banking, you're trying to build relationship. That's the buzzword today. Everybody wants to be in relationship banking. Well, I think you guys know it's hard to develop a relationship with any sort of provider if every time you're dealing with that institution, it's a different face. You're having to understand and connect. When you can go into the bank, whether it's with a consumer transaction or whether it's a commercial relationship, and you're dealing with the same commercial assistant, the same relationship manager, it's a whole lot easier to build that level of trust and to and that allows us obviously to be able to serve that client, but to deepen the wallet share. So talent is so important. Now, what I would tell you, we're invested in our talent, but we also have to continue to invest in bringing in talent from outside. I don't like to think about some of the challenges some of our peers are dealing with mergers and with changes in their operating model. But people are looking for a platform that they can come to that allows them to deliver their best, and whether that's serve their clients or be able to do the best job they can do. It's so over the last 2 years, we've been adding. We're up about 3% in the number of heads that we have at the company. And I think that's important because it shows that not only are we growing our balance sheet, but we're growing the talent that we have. Now, we have to be selective. We're in an expense management environment, but we think that if you stop recruiting, then you're in a position where you stop growing. So we need to develop the internal talent, keep them engaged, and ultimately continue to serve as a platform that attracts talent from other institutions.
Hey, Kevin, with a great blend at Synovus of tech and banking, traditional banking with kind of innovative tech, where did you guys land in the design of your hybrid workplace, working remote versus in office, and being able to attract talent, looking for that work-life balance?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a one-size-fits-all model. When I read in the journal or in a lot of the publications where people are either saying everybody has to be in the office or everybody has to be working remotely, what I've found is that you have to listen to your leaders, and you have to be able to have a good pulse of the team members themselves. And so what we've done is the hybrid approach is we probably have about 70 to 75% of our team members that are back in the office. But when I say they're back in the office, that doesn't mean that they don't have flexibility to work a day or two from the comfort of their home office, or that they need to be home for a personal situation that they don't have the tools and resources to be able to do that. I think when you try to paint a very hard line to say everybody has to be 100% in or 100% out, I think you're saying that every position is the same. We all know it's not. We can track productivity through logins and keystrokes and things like that. So if we have positions that we're worried about productivity and they're not making widgets, so you can't see what they're doing, we have ways of figuring out whether those people are productive or not. But what we've found is that instead of trying to mandate it, is we're trying to create an environment where people want to come in the office. So a couple examples, in all of our major facilities in the Southeast, in Tampa and Fort Lauderdale, we're building a new facility in Columbus. Here in Atlanta, I'm in Atlanta today. We're trying to make the office a place where people want to come. And so then you're not having to tell people, I want to see you in the office. They want to come in, they want to collaborate, they want to spend time with their leaders and with their peers. And so you're not having to dictate it. So our model has been one that allows the leaders to make those decisions. I'll tell you, just common sense wise, in our larger cities where traffic's an issue, there's more value placed on working from home because you could burn an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours a day in the car. If you give those hours back to that team member, we feel like we're getting that back where they're actually being more productive at work.
Yeah, good old Atlanta traffic.
Yeah, who doesn't like that? Hey, before we move off to the next topic, I did mention Admiral McRaven. Some folks may remember, he gained a lot of fame for a commencement address where he talked about the first thing you do in the morning is you make your bed, and it's getting something accomplished. And
I'll be right back.
You didn't make your bed this morning, Steve. Come on. But, Kevin, I'm curious. Again, you spent some time with him. Were there leadership lessons that he shared that you're trying to bring into your organization because you think it will create that type of dynamic that people really, gravitate towards?
It's a really good point. So we've had Admiral McRaven at 3 different locations. We have one more tomorrow night in Orlando. And what we did is we're going to continue to sign leaders that can come into our marketplaces and inspire. We're calling it Journeys to Inspire. So listening to other leaders and what they've done to be successful in their careers to try to inspire not only our team members, but we bring in prospects and clients. And each event we've had, Atlanta, Tampa, and Fort Lauderdale, has had over 300 people attend. And we were talking about, we've given out his new book. His new book is called Wisdom of the Bullfrog. And that's obviously a reference to his Navy SEALs days. But he walks through a lot of life lessons. But, for me, it's about, stating a purpose where everyone can rally around that purpose. And so whether that's a military application or whether it's in the corporate world, and we see this in our engagement surveys, people want to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And if we all can have a common purpose and work towards that, it breaks down a lot of the barriers that prevent us from being successful in execution. And so, he has a million stories on how that worked for him. But the other thing that really sticks out for me is, in his definition of winning is probably different than what we have in the corporate world. But when you apply a military application, understanding the team around you and making sure that you hold each other accountable. We spend way too much time talking about performance reviews and how HR can help us in managing performance. That's not necessary. In the military and in Admiral Craven's world, you lift each other up. And if you exercise that accountability within your team, you're not having to rely on some performance management process. You're working to make each other better. And then that common goal, that team outcome, is something that you celebrate or you hold each other accountable when you fail. So I think there's so much to take away from his thoughts. And ultimately, we'll continue to do some of these journeys to inspire with some other leaders that allow our clients, our team members, to really be able to emulate some of the best leaders that we can talk to and lead.
Great way to bring clients and employees together.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Really awesome.
And no one ever charged a hill for EPS or CECL or deposit beta. So I like the purpose comment.
There we go. All right. So now we're going to flip over. I'm going to bring Charlie Daniels in. And I'm going to say, try as I might, I can't wait any longer. So if you care to take a dare, I'll make a bet with you. That's the devil went down to Georgia. But that bet that I'm going to make with you, Kevin, is the size of your institution today tracks to becoming about a $100 billion bank at some point in the relative near term. And I'm not going to throw a dart and tell you the exact month, but you've got to be preparing for this. Could you help us understand how you continue to move a ship of your size towards that potential goal?
The first thing I'd say, Al, is you're right. I mean, we tried to establish a growth profile that allows us to exceed the growth of our peers. And you started this whole conversation with the SEC, but it's really the Southeast. When you look at the population growth in our 5-state footprint, it's 2x the national average. Same thing on household income growth. I mean, it's pretty exceptional. So if you're going to be in a fast growth footprint, you better deliver outsized growth. And so as we think about our future, one of the things that we've already completed is an assessment of what would be required when you pass through that $100 billion mark. Obviously, with the new tailoring rules, the $100 billion line is going to be substantial. We had an outside firm come in and assess our current capabilities and evaluate where we would need to invest further, both in resources and technology. And what I would tell you is, our leadership team here, a lot of folks have been here for a great deal of time. We've also had a good mix of folks coming from super regional banks. And so I would say when we look at our risk practices today, they're largely consistent with what you would see in a bank that's already over $100 billion. The biggest difference, and probably the biggest expense, is around data, analytics, and reporting. So today we already do stress testing, and we do a modified liquidity coverage ratio, but we're not having to do a 2052A. We're not having to present our CCAR findings. We're just doing a capital plan. So a lot of it will just be fingers and toes, resources to produce reports. A lot of it will be building databases and data flows that allow us to provide more consistent and frequent reporting. And then the last, obviously, probably the costliest will be just having to raise capital from a TLAC perspective or having to do things there. But we feel like our risk practices will be mature by the time we get to that $100 billion mark. Our data, we've already started to build our infrastructure. So for us, it's just going to be more of the capital impact and probably just some of the work that needs to be done. But I would just end this by saying scale's important in a lot of ways. But I always like to provide this thought when people talk about this, especially we've heard this rhetoric recently about too small to succeed. When we went through this March 10th bank failure mini crisis, when I joined Synovus 7 years ago, I get the question coming from a larger bank, like, why would you join a smaller bank? How do they win in this environment, which is a race for scale? And my argument to that is we've been winning the whole time. I mean, we're continuing to grow market share against larger banks in many areas. The great equalizer in all of this is fintech. If you can go out and be able to leverage R&D from a third-party company that's developing great technology and solutions and capabilities without having to develop your own proprietary solution. You can do it in a much more scalable way with software as a service. So scale matters. And look, we want to grow, and we look at that as an outcome of our success. But I'm not a believer that you have to go be over $100 billion to be successful in this space. I think it's actually the contrary. Right now, between at our $61 billion, kind of in that really good sweet spot where we have all the capabilities and functionalities to compete, but we don't have the enhanced prudential standards to have to contend with.
Yeah. I'd want to pack as much revenue and capital management into it before I crossed 100. It will be a fun ride between 60 and 100. But speaking of fintech,
so, you've got to talk to us a little bit about Maast and what you're doing there. So we talked fintech. This is one of those digital banks that stood up in parallel to Synovus. If we were to use music, we'd have to, Ghost against REM and the end of the world as we know it. There's like the lines like, what is it? Lenny Bruce and Lester Bangs, birthday party cheesecake, jelly bean, vermouth, you're symbiotic, patriotic.
I bet you have
Slam, but I have to write this down. I can't even keep that.
It is a great song, but for the audience here, there's been so much focus around innovation in Synovus, and Maast represents digital banking as a service.
And that's why I use those lyrics, because when you're trying to sing along with REM, you're like, what the heck am I singing?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with, Maast. What the heck's going on? You've got a successful franchise, a great organization, strong digital team already in place. What took you to start something like Maast?
So look, we had a really talented team here that was in our payments area, and we started kicking around this idea several years ago. And if you think about what Maast is, it's really a channel. Think about it as a channel. What we were working with is the disintermediation that's occurring in banking. So in yesteryear, everyone had to come through bricks and mortar in order to access our bank services. Now we've allowed folks to have much more autonomy by giving them access to whether it's a physical channel or a digital channel. And so what we learned is that more than 50% of all small businesses today are beholden to a software as a service platform that helps them run their business. And what we know about small businesses, the one thing they can't create more of is time. A lot of these small businesses are sole proprietors or partnerships that they're intermixing their business with their personal endeavors. But ultimately, we know that they're on these software platforms a lot during the day to run their business. And so we said, look, if we can integrate banking services through their independent software vendor partner, then it's a one-stop shop. And that started with providing payment facilitation. So we go to the software vendor, we allow them to basically become a merchant acquirer. And based on our history as being a sponsor organization through the merchant acquiring platform, it's an easy way to enter through the software. The software then gets to create more revenue. And what's happening today with all these software vendors, they're getting more and more competition. And so their margins are starting to contract. So if we can come to them and offer them a solution, give them a cut of the revenue, then they're able to improve their margins by offering an even better solution to their end users. Yeah. And so Maast for us is a full digital banking solution that started with payment facilitation that now provides full banking solutions. It has a Nimbus core on the back end, which allows us to have real-time data. It allows us to have the API connections that adds in additional services. So as that client relationship grows from a deposit relationship or money movement, it can then add payroll and lending capabilities, all within the same platform that they're working on every day within their business.
How's the deal flow, Kevin, in terms of pipeline of new potential partners looking right now?
I was with our team last week, and the challenge of developing a great product is everybody wants it. So we've already signed up 9 clients, and what we're trying to do as we onboard those clients is to take it with a gated approach so that you're not onboarding so many clients that you're not delivering the client experience that you want. So we're actually putting some controls in up front where I think we have a pipeline of another 10 or 15 that have already signed the paperwork. We're trying to just focus on the initial 9 to 10 that we have. We want to make sure that their experience is what we anticipated. And then we'll start to onboard the additional clients. So I said on our last earnings call, there's 3 legs of this stool. The first leg was we have to determine whether there's interest and demand from these ISPs. I think we can check that box. We have that. We continue to have interest in it. The second is, can we offer enough solutions that gets enough traction that allows us to earn revenue through that banking as a service platform. And it's too early to know that yet because we're just onboarding these first set of clients. The third is what will be the end user adoption. Is it 10% of the clients, 50% of the clients, 5% of the clients? That will determine how big it is. But I feel like we've been able to prove that these clients want some banking as a service capabilities. The software vendors want to provide it. And now we just have to execute in order to get the revenue where we want it to be per client.
We love these niche swing for the bleachers, like do something new. And I think it leverages the great history of TSYS and payments. And what you have that many banks don't have is product managers who grew up delivering product like you have now over at Maast.
But also it goes into this idea you're tailoring the relationship to the customer, to the client's needs. And earlier you talked about trust and how it's shifting. This is just another way that you can develop trust in a digital world where Maast, which stands for money as a service, really becomes a wonderful part of their business process. And so the trust gets developed based on actual behaviors, not because you're just talking big game.
I hope when we edit the video of this, we can get Woody, the mascot of the organization, flipped up. Beautiful golden retriever. Beautiful. I want to meet Woody sometime.
Well, we got a few pictures that we could probably throw behind us when we're all said and done. Now we've talked some classic Georgian artists. Probably the most famous is Ray Charles. I couldn't really come up with anything for this one because I want to talk M&A real quick, and I think there's only one way to use the Indigo Girls, and it's the Power of Two. Their song. I won't even bother to try to sing it. But my old colleague Jack Milligan, who's the editor emeritus at Bank Director, once called bank M&A really the industry's great game. And we're starting to see deals announced, and this is after a period where there was just nothing. So I realize there's a lot of chatter behind the scenes. We're starting to see private equity firms, come in, change, the game a little bit. There's seller expectations that have to be balanced with the pragmatic approach of who's going to buy you. I'm just curious, Kevin, you're sitting in a seat where I'm sure you're seeing a lot of opportunities if you wanted to go after them. But broadly speaking, how do you look at the M&A environment at the moment, and what kind of has you thinking we got to spend a little bit more time than we had over the last few quarters?
Well, look, I think all of the factors you've mentioned, and in the environment we're in, let's be honest, that the level of uncertainty that exists today with interest rates, with concerns around credit, with the regulatory environment, when you have those sort of big rocks to break, you're going to have probably more sellers than you have buyers. So I think there are a lot of banks that are looking at their 1, 2, 3 year forecast, and they're saying, look, I'm not sure that we can continue to provide growth on our balance sheet through our P&L at a level that our shareholders would be excited about. And so when you're one of those CEOs and you have that sort of 3 year forecast, it's your fiduciary responsibility to say, can we create more value through M&A? I think that's starting to exist. As you guys know, there's two big impediments to M&A today. Number one is the regulatory environment. There's a little bit of confusion on whether there's a constructive environment to approve some of these transactions. Obviously, the First Horizon TD deal had a lot of people concerned about the next deal that gets announced and can they get it approved. And so I think the Bank of California PacWest deal was a unique deal, as we all know. So I don't know that provides anybody with great comfort, but we've got to get clarity with our regulators on, M&A and whether that's something that they're willing to accept and approve. That's number one. Number two, as you guys know, with merger accounting, if you were to buy a bank today, you have to mark their balance sheet to market, and that requires a lot of capital. And as we saw with the Bank of California PacWest deal, that capital was provided through private equity, to your point out. And I think that's where you'll see private equity play. I don't think private equity has a great deal of interest in banks just because of the regulatory environment. It's something that makes it hard for them to want to own a bank. I think private equity will help to provide the capital, because if you can do that, there's tremendous synergy. When you look at the deal metrics today, if you can mark a balance sheet to market and you can take the capital hit, the EPS accretion that comes out of the other side is humongous. It's big.
Yeah. And the paybacks are getting shorter. You're right.
Very short. And so as rates moderate, I think as these marks come down a little bit, I think the uncertainty doesn't go away in the system. So I think you're going to see more and more M&A. The other thing I would tell you, and it's something that we all need to keep top of mind, Boston Consulting Group shared a number with me this past year that shocked me. They said that 2/3 of all middle market lending that occurred in this last year, 2022, happened outside of traditional banking. 2/3 of middle market. So what's happening today, banks are being disintermediated by private placement and private equity and in capital markets. And so, if the pie keeps getting smaller because of their shadow providers, there probably needs to be fewer banks executing in that space. So I believe that you'll continue to see consolidation. I think rates need to come down. The regulatory environment needs to become a little more constructive. And ultimately, I think you'll see folks that go out and do transactions. We've had some bank mergers that hadn't gone very well, and I think that's put a question mark on some of the mergers of equals. But I think if someone can do it right, get the cost saves, but also build the synergies, you're going to see other people go and try to do the same thing. We need to have some success there for people to want to do it.
Yeah, that accretion from the mark is going to be very tempting at some point, and ability to do a balance sheet restructure. Speaking in the Southeast, what if we could have the folks at Chick-fil-A in charge of merger approvals? That would be my dream.
Be okay with that. And if we could get lunch out of it too.
Well, we are coming up on time, so I want to just wrap things up by giving a little shout out to two of your colleagues. So Zach Bishop and Liz Wolferton, two awesome folks that have been seen on social media rocking some very sweet Air Force Ones. So I know there's been this whole sneaker craze. You mentioned Nimbus. Jeffrey Kendall, their CEO, I think kicked this whole thing off. But you guys have taken it to another level. You got the whole swagged out team doing things. So, I know how proud everyone is of getting something new. I'm going to use Ludacris and his song Act a Fool, because you just bought a new pair and they scuffed your shoes. What you going to do? Act a fool. So I like the idea that you're getting something that gets people excited. And I want to put this against some of the new stuff that's hitting our industry that's got everyone talking. So generative AI, not just ChatGPT, but generative AI has really been this summer's big intellectual focal point for many people, ourselves included. You can also spend a lot of time going down rabbit holes if you're not careful. We saw this with crypto, with blockchain, the whole DeFi space. So you can spend a lot of time on things that may not have a material impact on your business today, but you'd also be maybe putting yourselves at a disadvantage if you didn't commit to some learning.
Not a lot of people in my metaverse branch, by the way, right now.
Unfortunately, but it might change. But here's where I want to ask you, Kevin, if you've got your Air Force Ones on and you're walking around feeling pretty good about things, how do you think about what's on the near-term horizon that your team needs to spend time looking and learning about, but it may not have that, impact on your next quarterly earnings report?
I think this is the most difficult thing being a public company, because you're incented to squeeze every ounce of expense and to accelerate every dollar of revenue into the existing quarter so that you can exceed your expectations and deliver for the shareholders. I remember when I was in my MBA class, there was a case study on 3M, and everyone knows the story with 3M, where every year they try to develop between 10 and 25% of their revenue 5 years out. And so what we try to do internally, and Zach and Liz, both from a digital and innovation standpoint, we're thinking about what future sources of revenue are. Because when you think about the game of growth, if all you're doing is trying to grow the same businesses over and over again, there's a law of diminishing returns. And so we talk about taking some of the pressure off some of our existing businesses by introducing new sources of revenue. And kind of my rule of thumb is 10% of the revenue 3 years out needs to be from new thoughts and ideas. And that's how Maast came up. It's how we started adding in more around analytics. And that's how we developed our corporate and investment bank, which was an extension of our commercial offerings about 2 years ago. And so it's hard to do, but I think you've got to keep your folks focused on that 3-year forecast. And that 3-year forecast is never accurate, because a million things change, as we know, interest rates, credit environment, whatever. But when you're looking out 3 years, it forces you to make decisions that are not just good for the short run, but are good for the long-term shareholder value. And look, in environments like this, where you're having to be tight on expenses, we've been very clear. We'll cut back on expenses just like everybody else. But what we won't do is, if we have an idea that we think is accretive to the shareholders, we're not going to cut that back to a point where we're not going to invest in it. And I think what that allows us to do is, when we get to the other side of this environment, margin contraction and credit uncertainty, we're in a better position than others, because you've seen it happen where everybody just takes the easy way out and they stop spending on everything. I've heard examples where they won't let their relationship managers travel to see clients. They don't let business development. Well, that's a faux pas, because if you're not out being seen, some other bank is being seen in your stead. So we keep that mindset. We focus on the 3 years. We're mindful. We may cut back the incremental expense each year on some of those initiatives, but if we're believers, we're not going to be able to justify to ourselves that there's still not an ROI there. And it's hard, but you've got to stick with your guns. And ultimately, I think that's what will allow us, when we get into these out years, continue to differentiate ourselves from a growth standpoint.
I think, to put this in perspective for our audience, for being in Kevin's chair at his size at $60 billion, when you lose about 30 basis points in NIM because of what's happened in this environment, that's over $1.5 billion of revenue that now we got to get really scrappy with investing. And Kevin, looking at your Q2 results, one thing really impressive is that non-interest income CAGR that you guys are knocking out, more than double digit over the past year or so.
Yep.
Impressive in this environment. I think it comes from you telling the team to be scrappy with new sources of revenue.
It is. It's treasury and payment solutions. We made a major investment there 3 years ago, brought in a new team. We've added 80 people over that time frame, 32 new capabilities in the last 2 years. We've added to our wealth teams, our family office. I mean, you've got to make sure that, people that rely on fee income strategies that are based on interest rates. And look, I love mortgage, but a lot of people laid a lot of money because mortgage rates were low. It wasn't anything we did. You've got to actually have an intentional strategy to say what differentiates you from a fee income perspective. We know some of those businesses are lower margin, generally, wealth and others. So you've got to have a concerted strategy. And I think our team has really executed on that. And it's going to give us some ability, along with money as a service and some of our other banking as a service platforms that we'll announce in the coming weeks and months. I think we'll have a good tailwind as it relates to fee income going forward.
Yeah, it's hard work. You got to be patient, but you get credit not in the short run, but in the long run, I think.
That's right.
Amen. So we just got to say thanks to Kevin for talking about this great game of growth. It's been awesome to spend a little bit of time with you. We appreciate you getting plugged in with us. He's Steve Williams. I'm Al Dominic. We'll catch you again in a future episode of Cornerstone Advisors Plugged In.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Thank you, guys.